Hello, this is Tracy Halverson, your host on Escape Velocity, and today I am joined by Ashley Budd, who is the co-author of an awesome book called Mailed It. And your co-author's name is Dayana. Am I saying
Da-
that right?
Diana Kibbles.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
We have a lot to talk about. We were just talking before I hit record. Ashley works in higher ed. And so obviously there's a lot of disruption happening there and everywhere right now.
Yes.
But when we were just talking about what value we wanted this conversation to have for anyone who listens, it's like Ashley's going to share some tips, some hacks, as she calls them.
hmm hmm
Um, and let's use these things for good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Right? Like we need more.
2025.
We need more of that.
What a time to be alive.
I heard someone say, like, you don't get to pick the time in human, evolution that you get to live through. I'm like, whew, no kidding.
Yeah. Wouldn't have picked this one probably.
I don't know. I mean, I've also like it's such an exciting time on a lot of
hmm
fronts, and
hmm
it's such a terrifying time on a lot of
hmm
fronts. So
Yes. If you are up for a challenge,
yeah,
wooey, we got one. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's complicated, right? Like
Yeah.
there are you have to be able to hold a lot of different things as being true at the same time right now. It's
Yes.
not a great
Yes.
time for anyone to think that it's just one thing.
Yes.
So,
Amazing.
that being said, for anyone that's watching this and not just listening, I'm going to hold up the cover of the book.
There she is.
There she is, all my sticky notes sticking out of it. And once again, it's called Mailed It, which I love. And I love your beginning too. It just sucked me right in, just the storytelling and it was something I could so relate to, even though, I'm older than you. And when I first got my hands on, my first, AOL CD,
Yes,
America
can we
Online
reminisce,
yeah,
please, about the glory days of
of You've
email?
Got Mail.
We had a whole rom-com about this.
I mean, I used to think AOL was the internet at first,
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I was just sort of like, "What is this? What?" And, I mean, I did what I had just gotten out of college and I went to art school, so I missed
Mhm,
a lot of technology, but I was
mhm.
in terms of what was being shown to me, but I've always been a real geeky, techie person. My
We're so
favorite
similar in that, Tracy,
yeah.
because I too went to school for painting,
Yep.
but picked a technical university because I'm a bit of a geek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
picked I picked a program for graduate school where I could, like, do whatever I wanted creatively.
Mm,
So it
mhm.
was like painting and making, stop motion digital films,
Cool.
you know, which was great. Everybody was
Mhm.
like, "Yep, she's just doing her thing." But I do remember, email is like the OG form of communication,
Yeah.
in this revolutionary shift in the way that we can communicate and can share information and share data and connect with each other
Yeah,
in
it's really held strong, right? Like, the creators of this thing,
they
they
did a
thought
good
it th
job.
yeah, they thought it through. It's got what we need, right? We can send immediately, receive within seconds. We can send attachments, right? Like, there's all these little, like, nuances. The subject line is really
Yeah,
helpful to have. There's things that you don't have even in SMS or other communication channels, that it's kind of got it all, and I think that that's why it's had this really long lifespan, but it also got in our hands at the same time that we got the web,
yeah,
and, if we think about probably when it got into most people's hands was in the 90s,
yeah,
and by the early 2000s, we had social media. And I think we kind of skipped over the usefulness of email and web, quite frankly, in so many ways, with social media giving us this ability to publish. And now we have kind of seen social media go full course, full cycle, haven't we? To
Yeah.
see where these more reliable tools like email and our own websites, our own properties that we own, um, have such a different kind of staying power. One of the other things I think about in just the evolution of the tool and in this time is I think a lot about my father in the actual post mailbox.
Mhm.
And in the same time, right in the 90s when we were starting to get email, his like he would get so mad at the mailbox because it was just overflowing with junk.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Like every day he would go out and he would come like marching back in the house, like so mad that I put them on the do not send list, right? Like the I don't want the junk mail. And I can remember these like glory days of email where we didn't have that. And it was like, oh, somebody sent me a message. Yay. And even my first professional role where I would go in and sit down at my desktop computer and read all, what, 8 emails that I had, and then go on and do my job.
Yeah.
And it's just not like that's just not the way
No,
it
no,
is anymore. Um,
no.
at
And
all.
I do worry about that, right? Like the
Yeah,
noise canceling out the signal. And
yeah.
I worry about that on all fronts right now with
Mhm,
generative AI and just with AI in
mhm.
general and its ability to crank out stuff
Yes.
that that as of right now, really doesn't doesn't feel good. You
No.
can tell
Mhm.
when you get that email that was written by AI.
Yeah, we are pushing 400 billion emails being sent every single day. 400 billion emails
Wow.
being sent every day, and that is, for every person on the planet with an internet connection,
Yeah.
that's about 75 emails for every human being
A day.
on the planet a day,
A day.
a day. Um, and yeah, that's noisy. Um,
Yeah.
that's it's worse for professionals, right, than
Oh,
it
yeah.
would be for, um, a youngster with an internet connection.
Well, it's also interesting because, I mean, I'm with a small team, and we still have a lot of conversations about, okay, well, here's when you want to send me this kind of message, send me a text.
Mhm.
When it's about this, I prefer an email. When it's
Yes.
about this, send me a Slack. When it's about this, post it in, ClickUp or our project management software or whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I do think there are multiple avenues now where there only used to be one for email.
Yeah.
And I think SMS and text is another sort of interesting one where there's more professional correspondence happening there than there
Mhm.
used to be.
Mhm.
But I think it's also just attempts to cut through the noise.
Mhm.
But then you do get to a point where you're like, I don't even know where to look. I'm overwhelmed wherever I look.
Yes.
And so that now you've got all the tools that come in and say, oh, well, we'll filter it for you.
Yes.
Right.
There
So you've got your junk filters and your spam filters. And I have for many years paid for a filtering platform called SaneBox,
okay.
S SANE, like make your mailbox sane again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it works pretty good, but also like I don't have the time to kind of train it.
Mm.
And now we've got AI sort of
Mhm.
summarizing emails for us on
Mhm.
our phones and on our computers. So a lot is changing right now with email. And I know you even mentioned in the book where you touched upon AI,
Mhm.
and you're like,
Mhm.
we're hesitant to even talk about it because it was 2023 when you were writing and you
Yes.
knew how quickly it was going to change. And the summarization
Mhm.
is something I wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
because that is kind of pushing against that, like, very handy, subject line that
Mhm.
we used to rely on, and
Mhm.
anyway, I mean, I don't wanna jump into the middle of the thread,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. No,
what
let's jump into it
tell me what you
because
think about that.
yes, it's you know, I'm not afraid of the robots. I think it's in the email space anyway.
Yeah.
And I think they are here to help because billions and billions of emails we can't possibly filter ourselves. And so they're trying. They're not doing it right yet, but they're trying. And what we're really happy to hear is that the principles that are in the book, which we tell people you just need to tell people what's in your subject line just needs to be, what is this email about, right? And so we've got to get away from the cute subject line, and I'm breaking hearts of creative writers everywhere who spend all of this energy on crafting a really persuasive and enticing subject line or something with a question.
Yeah.
and and you're so right about the overwhelm. When we ask people, when you think about your inbox, what words come to mind? It's overwhelming, it's chaotic, and it's some kind of like exasperated, ugh, like, ugh, yuck.
And it can be stressful too, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes bad news arrives via email. It's not,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's the equivalent of your boss being like, "Hey, can we talk for a minute?"
Right.
You
And
know?
if you are in your inbox feeling that way and the subject line is got a minute, right?
Yeah.
Got a minute for what? Tell
Oh,
me what you want from me. Just tell me.
yeah,
Don't
tell me.
try to trick me. Don't try to be cute about opening the email. And now maybe it will be the robots who who force this. What these filters are trying to do is they will open your email for you. They will read the content of it and they will see whether the content matches the subject line.
Yeah,
And if it does, good, green light. This looks like an email that's not trying to trick you. And
yeah.
so I do think writers are going to have to move away from those old tactics and do more of what we're recommending in the book, which is tell them what's in the email right in that subject line and then use clear, simple language inside the email
Now,
once you get in there.
so you also say in the book, which I agree with, that like personalization
Mhm.
is not just about, including someone's first name
Yeah.
or using the robots to be like, okay, they said they liked sports, so let's make sure we include a sports story.
Yeah.
It's about having a personality,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Thank you.
I also think that human connection,
Mm.
um, authentic, like real
Mm.
human connection is going to be even more sort of highlighted as like, "Oh, that felt good or that was
Absolutely.
special." So where do you weave in the personality? All the creative writers, I think about Anne
Yes.
Handley, and,
Yes, of course.
love reading, what these people have to say about good writing, great writing.
Yes. Yes.
And the other thing you said, which did crush my soul, I mean, there's so many things in this book that I'm
Mm.
like, "Oh, I do that." Oh, I do start out with like, "Oh, I hope, the kids are good or I hope you're doing
Yeah.
well and
Yes.
hope you're hanging in there," whatever it is, and you're like, "No, get rid of that."
Yes. I
Um,
have so for anyone who's watching the video version, I have the t-shirt on today. The I hope this email finds you well t-shirt. Um
that's great. I think I
it
need one of those.
we need to get you one of these. So, yes, I think the exciting thing for us was that we know that we can use email to build relationships. And
Right.
oftentimes it's just used to drive people to take action. But we know you can build a relationship over email, and that's such a powerful thing. But you're
Yeah.
not going to do that with a drip campaign. You're not going to do that with something that's fully automated. You're going to do that by injecting your own personality and personal touch into these things. And so we start in the book just talking about how do you build trust with your audience.
Yeah, I love that was one of your quadrants or your triangle points.
The triangle, right.
Triangle.
The trust triangle is one of our favorite models because it's just so simple.
Yep.
And we say that first because yes, there are some hacks in this book, right? Like we show you exactly where somebody's eyes are going to go
I love that.
when they
Yeah.
open your email so that you can put your message where they can't help it but see it. And that's a beautiful hack, but they're not going to act on anything or even get to the point where they're opening their email if they don't trust you.
Yeah.
And so all of these points about, the personality that you have and the humanness behind it, I rely on that trust triangle when I'm trying to understand, okay, what is the reader going to want from me? And the points on the triangle are authenticity, empathy, and logic. And the triangle is not ours. This is from Francis Fry and Anne Morris. But these 3 points are also what Aristotle taught in rhetoric. It's ethos, pathos, and logos. So this is
It's
human
got the same
behavior.
power. Yeah.
Yeah, this goes back to the real before times, right? When we're are understanding human behavior. And what Francis Fry and Anne Morris would say is that you have to have all three. You can't just be authentic. And what authenticity in email means is that you have a voice, you have a personality, and in this more and more robotic world, you're right, it needs to come through. And it's about being honest. And I think for all of my marketing friends, we like we can get excited about anything, right? Like we can make anything seem exciting. But when you're meeting somebody, especially in your inbox, and you're in that overwhelming state, and you're just like, do you want to be hit with the like, I have the most exciting offer for you? No. Right. So it's like we got to keep it real. We can't say things are exciting when they're not. We
No, or
can't
like
say,
make me
to my
scroll like
higher ed
40 minutes.
friends,
Yeah.
we can't say apply now when the deadline is 3 months from now. Like, why now? I'm checking my email on the toilet. Why do I need to do this now? Right?
Yeah.
Like this is what's
Fault.
really happening in real life. So the authenticity is all about keeping it real and having a
Mhm.
voice. And the empathy is all about them, right? It's all about where they're at, trying to be helpful, trying to meet their needs.
Right.
And a lot of times it's about introducing a lot more of a nurturing relationship into the email program than just the asking and asking and asking. And then the last piece, I think, you could be the most authentic organization, the most empathetic organization out there, but if your reader cannot follow your logic, you've lost them. So if they don't understand why they're getting your message, that any chance that we can, any like hole that we can poke, right? Like any chance that you give us to delete, we're going to delete because we're just trying to get through this volume. So
Yeah.
all of those things have to have all three. But if you do all three, then you're going to build, like, that's where the relationship building comes. And then we can try to combat this volume, which is billions of emails and the
Only going up.
same amount of hours in the day. Like we're not
Right.
getting more hours in the day. So if the volume is going up, we don't have as much time to read. And people aren't reading. And so, when somebody says, well, people don't read your emails, I'm like, yeah, they don't, but they skim them or they'll glance at them.
Yeah.
A third of our readers are just glancing for 2 seconds.
I loved I want to just pause right there because it's 2 seconds.
Yeah. Ouch.
And you say in the book, write an email and then give it to a trusted friend or colleague and
Yeah.
start your timer and just say, I'm gonna stop you at 2 seconds. Can you
Two
tell me what the
seconds.
point of this email was?
Exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
so, if you're a communication professional, your job is not to send emails. Your job is to get your message received.
Right.
That's the job. And if we know that a whole third of our audience is only spending 2 seconds, we've got like another chunk that's going to skim, they're going to give us 8 seconds. And then we've got another chunk that will actually sit there and read it. But even then, they're not dedicating a lot of time to reading. If we want to reach everybody and get your message received, we have to be able to deliver the message in that 2-second glance. And
Yeah.
that's where the fun part comes in. That's where I think all my user experience friends will get excited to see how we've applied solid web UX research to email, with the eye tracking studies from our friends at Nielsen Norman Group that go all the way back to early web days, where they discovered that how people read on a blank background, text on a blank background, your eyes are going to do this very predictable F pattern.
Yep.
And so they're going to read your first line. They'll read that you hope this email finds you well.
Yep.
They'll read that. They will. And then they're going to skip down to the next paragraph break. They're going to read that first line, maybe not the whole thing, maybe just the beginning of it. And then the eyes do this left-hand scan all the way down, and they check this again later on mobile. Same thing, F patterns, a little bit more scrolling. Right to left reading language, same thing. F is inverted. And it's just, we are so predictable, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't use that first line as a throwaway. And
Yeah.
it's hard to not be nice and
Yeah.
open your email that way, but you can close with something nice.
I loved that. Yep.
And I still have a hard time even writing if I don't get it out of my system. So I write the nice thing, and then I shove it all the way down. And then I can get the rest of my thoughts out, but otherwise I'm stuck in the I gotta be nice. Um,
Well, then there's a reward. If you do
mhm,
scan and get all the way to the bottom, there's a nice
mhm.
reward
There's
of
a
a
nice
nice
yeah,
part, you know? It's like,
right.
"Oh, yeah, she asked about the kids," or whatever it might be.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I really do think it's the combination of on like hacking that eye pattern, knowing where they're going to see it in a glance, and then using really simple language to make sure that it's understood when people are reading so fast. And if you do that, you kind of build this momentum. And I think again, the empathy of it, right? Like thinking about a person who is like, I'm just trying to get through this email. They see your email and you're doing it right. Okay, I know what you want. I get it.
Yeah.
Great, I'll do it and I'm done and I've checked something off and that feels good, right? If you have the momentum to understand and move something forward,
Yeah.
now we're feeling good, right? And I do want to harp on the simple language a bit because especially in the academic world that I'm in, like we pride ourselves in how verbose we can be, right? We
Right.
pride ourselves in the big words that we use and like, all of the grammar rules that we can follow. And it really doesn't work. And we're losing people by using language that, yes, of course, uh, they can understand it, but do they want to have to read at a postgraduate level in email? No, they wanna just be able to get through it and you feel better, and again, Nielsen Norman Group, has studied this 7th to ninth grade reading level, which is as close to spoken word, a conversational tone that we can get to.
Yeah.
People will act faster,
Mhm.
and it reduces doubts and hesitations and anxieties and all the things that we're feeling. And so, the tools that there's tools available out to all of us out there to make language simpler.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit because I think, in theory, everyone's gonna go, "Oh, yeah, I should do that," but it's really
Right,
hard to
right.
just
If I tell you write at a 7th grade reading level, like, I don't know what that means. So, I would say it's really close to spoken language, and if you can picture one person in your audience sitting across from you and thinking about the message that you need to send, what would you say to them? And just say it out loud and write it down. Use that spoken word language. That's going to get you pretty close to that reading level. Chat GPT is also pretty good at
Yeah.
simplifying language. Don't tell it to write at a 7th grade reading level. We've tried that. It gives you something written for a toddler. But if you just say, simplify this, it does a really good job at simplifying. We love the Hemingway app. That's a free
Mhm.
tool, hemingwayapp.com. The Hemingway editor that will tell you what your reading level is. Grammarly does this too. They'll even give you suggestions. But when we were starting to write the book and we saw how ChatGPT was writing emails, that was the thing that lit a fire because it was so bad at writing emails. It would start with, we hope this email finds you well, and all of the things that we knew weren't working. So
Well, it's a
after
good
we
yeah.
yeah, after we
It's a good reminder, right, that ChatGPT and a lot of these AI platforms are designed off of everything that's been done already.
Exactly. Yes, they're modeling after what they know. And so, after we published the book in August, the next task was to build a GPT that was better, based off the book. So we pumped it with some chapters of the book and we trained it, and that's available for free on our website, emailbook.co. You can find our resources in the GPT there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, there's so much good stuff there. The the idea of building trust, even if someone doesn't want to click on or engage with that
Mm,
particular thing that you're asking them to do,
mhm.
um, if you haven't wasted a bunch of their time and God forbid hoped the email found them well and perhaps it hadn't, um, I think that it's like, okay, well, I'll continue to open these emails because
Mhm.
I wasn't assaulted as well as,
Right.
and insulted, and wasted time and had my time wasted or gotten confused
Right.
on top of not wanting to engage right now.
Right.
You want to keep a lot of these audiences around and engaged, even though not every single email is going to require an action. And
Right.
I loved the other point you mentioned about when it's giving day at Cornell,
Mhm. Mhm.
that you preemptively let people know, hey, that's coming.
Mhm.
There's going to be a lot of messaging
Mhm.
coming out. Like if you want to just sort of be taken off the radar for
Yeah.
that, let us know. And
Yeah.
you, it's very thoughtful. It's very considerate.
Right. Yes.
And so I thought that was another great tip.
We put, and this is, for anybody who's concerned about their unsubscribe rate, we use this tactic. On our team, we call it our self-aware unsubscribe because we are aware that we're a lot. We send a lot. Our volume is high. And we know that that isn't good for everybody all of the time. So what we'll do is, and this is the tactic, it's in the same size font,
Excuse me.
same size font in the body of the email. It's not that 6 point tiny little
Oh, yeah.
font in the footer, right? It's right
Mm,
in the body of the email. It's typically a PS message, which we know gets read, because it's different and it stands out.
yes.
And so we will use these PS messages to say, for Giving Day, it says something like, "Hey, is Giving Day not your thing? That's okay. Unsubscribing is quick and easy, and it'll make your inbox a little bit clearer."
Which is
Uh,
so nice, right? It's worded in a way that's not like,
exactly.
"Oh, hey, don't have anything to give us," or
Right.
like, "Hey, about to fly into a rage because you're still paying off your student loans and we're about to ask you for
Yes.
money." Or let it my m one of my and I'm sure this is universal, right? When
Mhm.
the you just to go back to the unsubscribe
Mhm.
option, which we're
Mhm.
not talking about here with the PS, and I love that. But when the unsubscribe is hard for me,
Yeah.
I just wanna, break things.
Right.
Um, it's just
Yeah.
maddening.
It is. When I have to then go and tell you my
Yeah.
contact information again, or like, well, I don't know what email address you used, and I don't know, those. Yes, it is. It's like, that's when you get to the rage and subscribe moment, right? But we have found with people that we work with who put these PS statements, and I love to offer a pause instead of losing them forever.
Yeah.
And so on a newsletter, we're going to say, do you want to pause until the end of June or the end of December? Let's put these on pause. But a lot of people actually don't interact with those. And just having those statements
Yeah.
in the communication has dropped unsubscribe rates for some of the teams that we're working with up to 75%, just by having the statement there, because people see that, like, oh, they are, self-aware, right?
Yes.
Are you
Yes.
unable to, support the university financially at this time? We understand,
Yeah. I mean,
period.
I can feel my pressure release valve
Exactly.
opening when I imagine reading something like that, especially with if it's a organization or institution that I have a relationship with.
Mhm.
I don't wanna be driven to be
Mhm.
so full of
Mhm.
rage that I'm
Mhm.
unsubscribing. I don't have to do that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, you're letting them know, hey, giving day's coming up. You want to pause? We get
Yeah.
it. No
Not your
problem.
thing? Okay. Let us know
Yeah, it's
now
like, I
before
mean,
we
like,
annoy the
yeah,
heck out of you. Yeah, right?
yes,
And we know that people who are more engaged with us, and we can talk about that. How do we get people more engaged? How can we get them wanting it, right?
right,
We know people that are more engaged with us have a higher tolerance for email pain, right? People who
right.
are closer to us want to see what's going on. And so throughout the year, to get to the point where we have a really high volume ask driven campaign, to get to the point where we're there and we have people, our unsubscribe rate for giving day is like 0.04%. It is people, they don't want to miss it because we've created this reputation that it's going to be fun and that we're going to use the same voice that we use. We're the same team, we're the same group that you've been hearing from all year. But what they've been hearing from us all year is that we're here for you, that we're creating things for you. And I want my readers subconsciously, when they see an email from the university, to think, oh, there's probably something good in there for me. And I'm going to open that. And there's probably something I'm going to click on because we've created week after week these valuable offers to them. And sometimes it's just as simple as putting a smile on their face.
Mhm.
If you can imagine having to go through your emails and a sender every time is going to make you laugh, that's one that you want to keep, right? So
Yes.
again, like the empathy, and meeting people where they are, and where they are in the inbox is not great.
Yeah. I have a million questions
Okay.
now, to follow up with on that, or
Mhm,
just a couple
mhm.
things you touched upon that I think are easier said than done,
Yeah.
and that I wanna dig in on a little bit.
Mhm,
So, one, humor.
mhm,
So you talk about offering value
mhm,
and having personality and a
mhm,
voice and tone, that's relatable, that's feels human and authentic.
mhm.
Um, I think that's really hard for institutions
Yeah.
to greenlight or to even
Mhm,
understand that that's what they need versus this should sound like the institution, whatever
mhm,
that is. And
mhm.
humor is not something I usually see
Yeah.
listed as like that should be part of the tone. And obviously, there's not. There are times when that's the inappropriate tone, depending on right.
Exactly. Right.
But how did you get?
How do we
Or
get there?
how did you get there? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So we started with just one campaign, right? So not taking a whole bite of the apple, but starting, let's see if there's one campaign that you can isolate and try this voice with and see
okay,
how it resonates. And then when it does, expand on that. And I think the personality can shift depending on the conversation, right? Just like you would if you were a human with a
yeah,
personality talking to somebody about an important topic versus like, I'm sending you a weekly newsletter. This is not serious. This is a relationship I'm trying to build with you. And if I'm going to show up and talk with you every week, do you want that to be stodgy?
yeah,
No, you want it to have some life to it. And so I think that approach, having the flexibility of you can still be the same personality in a more formal setting, in a more
mhm,
serious setting. Your voice changes when you talk to your friends versus when you talk to somebody you don't know.
we hope. Yeah,
You hope. Um, and so you can give yourself flexibility in those situations. I think my office, so I am senior director of advancement marketing for Cornell University. And so we serve the entire alumni base, and we're also doing this broad-based fundraising for the university. And so can we have maybe a different voice speaking to our alumni than perhaps the government affairs office? Yeah. Yeah, we can have a different voice there.
yeah,
Um, but, um, but, you know, giving ourselves permission to use emojis and giving ourselves permission to be very punny, right? Like
Mhm.
that is part of our personality. We're witty and we're clever. Um, but to, to the listeners who are like, not at my institution, that would never fly.
Right.
I would say like you can put some boundary statements around your voice, right? So
Mhm.
we can be funny and not be we can be informal even, but not sloppy,
Yeah.
right? We're not gonna be sloppy. We're gonna be caring. We're not gonna be uncaring, right? So you can kind of put these boundary statements around it when you're talking to your leadership about a new direction to say, we're not gonna take it that far. What's too far? Um,
I think
w
that's great, and I guess, your suggestion to pick one campaign
yeah.
where you can flex your voice towards
Mhm.
something that's a little bit more personable, and
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
agree, setting some boundaries and some guidelines for it,
Mhm.
and some examples, right,
Mhm.
to show leadership or to show
Yeah.
the larger community, "Hey, here's what we're gonna,
Mhm.
test," and then test it
Mhm.
because you'll know whether it's working or not,
Right.
and that's great data to go back to leadership with and say, "Look at this, people responded really well to it, so let
Mhm.
us, expand this a little bit further where it makes sense." And I also think that, when we talk about, again, you mentioned this in the book, give your readers something of value. Don't immediately jump to all of your asks.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned, like, do you need some suggestions for, like, what your parents can be doing while you're on a a tour of campus.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just so many great helpful things that they make the receiver of the email not just feel good and but look good
Right.
to for having that information, and suddenly you've got a kid who's like, "I'm gonna look super thoughtful to my parents because
Mhm.
I'm gonna be like, 'Hey, why don't you guys go check out the blah blah,'" you know?
Exactly, exactly. You know, if you are trying to reach students who are how many emails are these prospective students getting, right? How the heck are you gonna stand out? If your institution is the one that's not just talking about themselves, but
Mhm.
is gonna help them through this process, regardless of whether they attend your institution or not, right?
Yeah.
How are you gonna get through your senior year of high school? And you know that this one institution is there helping you with your advanced classes. They're
Yeah.
thinking about how to communicate with your parents about these issues. I don't know, like, can they help you get a prom date? I don't know. But, like, what are the things that are going on in their life,
Yeah.
and how do you insert yourself into that conversation? Because that's really where they're right, they're stressed. How can you help them reduce the stress?
Yeah, it's
How can you help them reduce anxiety in high school? And if you're the one coming up with, like, breathing tips today, I
mhm.
might open that email.
Yeah.
But instead, we talk about ourselves and our programs and apply now and look at our rankings and, like, who cares?
Yeah, it
Because I am worried about what's happening
me.
in my day,
Yeah.
right?
It's really I've been having so many conversations just about how we consume content, how we connect, how we
Mhm.
create relationships, and it's just something that I'm always interested in, and it's amazing to me that we tend that's why I guess empathy is on that triangle.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I used to joke that, everyone's website was just a reflection of their internal organizational structure,
Absolutely.
and was talking with, a colleague who, on an earlier podcast, actually, Miles Kemp, who runs a design agency called Variate,
Mhm.
and Variant. But anyway, he was talking about Conway's Law, which
Mhm.
is an interesting theory that I'd never heard of before, which says, like, the way that you communicate internally tends to be then the way that you communicate externally, or something
Mhm.
along those lines. But
Mhm.
I still have to study up.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of this, I think, is, a lot of email happens internal to groups and systems, and it's not external.
Mhm.
Um, and when there is a real dogmatic institutional way of speaking to each
Yeah.
other.
Right.
I think that's when you're in a situation where this is a really hard mountain to climb.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know you give some tips about building, the breaking through some of those barriers with stakeholders, but do you have any suggestions for someone who is listening to this, who knows they could be doing more with their email, but is stuck in that kind of a scenario?
Yeah, I think we always like to bring the evidence,
Mhm.
right? So the book is packed with research that you can point
Yes.
to help have those conversations. We love to bring the ugly worst case scenario, right? What could possibly happen? What could
Right.
possibly happen? And sometimes there is an ugly worst case scenario. Sometimes it's like, well, what's the worst that could happen? Why don't we try this, right? Um, so I think even seeing this is interesting. You talk about the internal um, communication and how that's reflective. As I've been training, even amongst the Cornell community, seeing the internal emails change, oh my goodness, it's so delightful
Wow.
to
Nice.
see even how we talk to each other
Yeah.
differently or how expectations of a communication are. And trying to pack every single little detail into a communication that we now know people won't retain, and what does it mean to just kind of hit the highlights. And yeah, there is a lot in the way we communicate with each other where it's this very like long form. I got to make sure I cover all my bases and everything is been vetted 19 times before I press send. um if we can kind of get ourselves, we got to simplify it, I think, really is what it comes down to. Can we be comfortable with something, an approach that's much simpler than
Yeah.
what we've built up?
Well, I think that's, again, the evidence and going into these conversations backed up with the evidence is
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
Um, and also, what's the worst that can happen, especially if you're already batting kind of a zero. It's
Yeah.
like, what, we take some more swings and still nobody engages.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Um,
want to just say something about deliverability too. Because the email service providers are getting more sophisticated,
mhm.
right? The technology is getting more sophisticated.
Yes.
If we keep sending bad emails, which I mean, where they get they don't make sense, they're hard to unpack, and so people aren't engaging with them, we are going to have a harder and harder time even getting in the inbox. And I have found in this past year, 2024 was when a lot of the tools became more sophisticated, that uh, partners that I work with on the consulting side, their emails weren't delivering at all, and they didn't know it, um, because the robots were opening them, right?
Yep.
And so they had opens. But
Right.
if the open rates are hovering around 20%,
Mhm.
I want you to be worried because that is probably just robots opening. And so I have found institutions that, they're saying email is dead or it doesn't work for us, and it's because they have put themselves in this reputational hole
Mhm.
with the email service providers. And so there is, I think it's time to relook at the program and to really reinvest in making sure that our lists are good, that we're doing the things that are going to help our emails deliver. And if you're concerned about the responses that you're getting, it might not be that the readers aren't reading. It might be actually that they're not even seeing it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's only going to get more and more amplified. And,
Exactly.
you know, I, when I think about, any large institution and all of their multiple channels they're trying to now communicate on, right?
Yes.
They've got their website, they've got their social media channels, they've got
Mhm.
their professional channels, they've got the systems they know are sucking their information in and
Mhm.
spitting it back out to their audiences. So
Mhm.
you've got all these filters and curatorial elements going on. And the lift it takes, the cost and time it takes to overhaul any one of these
Mm.
things is monumental.
Mhm.
And it's daunting when you're also kind of at a time in our evolution where it all needs to change very quickly.
Yeah.
So we've got to blow up a lot of things, I think, and let
Yeah.
go of a lot of very static, um, outdated ways of doing things and tools that we've used and processes that we've relied on to do
Mhm.
those things because we just simply can't use those things and keep up with with the pace of change.
Mhm.
And to me, email is the perfect place to start
Mm.
because it is not as expensive to
Mhm.
overhaul your email, um, your content delivery team around that's focused on email than it is
Yeah.
to like rebrand or,
Yeah.
do a whole new website project where you're talking about so much time and money if you're stuck doing it the old way. So for an institution that's like, we don't know where to start,
Yeah.
and we're saying start with email,
Mhm.
there's still a lot of people that are like, well, we already bought this expensive program and we're locked into using it, whatever it might be. And maybe you
Mhm.
can talk
Mhm.
through, like, in
Mhm.
your experience, what are good platforms, what are bad ones. And
Mhm.
I think everyone's just like, oh my God, we got to get personalization going. We still
Mm.
haven't even gotten that going. And
Mhm.
all these tools now, especially now with AI, are promising to do all of this stuff. Like, how do you cut through the noise and actually make some progress here?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a couple templates, email templates that we have in the book. They're also on the website.
And
And
remind everyone again what the website is.
emailbook.co.
Okay.
And they're very lo-fi templates on purpose. Because yes, there's lots of shiny tools that you can use. But these are built to be tool agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you have the fancy race car model or you're just writing your email in Microsoft Outlook. Truly doesn't matter because the principles um, are can still be applied.
Okay.
And what the templates will show you is where at a glance, in that 2-second glance, where the reader will read.
Yes.
So you can leverage those spaces. And there's a single call to action template that I think does that really well. The second template we often refer to as our newsletter template. So if you have more than one thing to communicate, the piece there that I think the value in it, I think, is again, it's all coming back to simplicity, but
Yeah.
what people will do when you have a newsletter or something that has multiple calls to action in it is if you break these things up by headings, people will just read your headings.
Mhm.
And what it reminded me of when you were talking was, if you're stuck in a newsletter template that is like campus news,
Right.
organizational updates, right? Upcoming events. And those are the headings that's what they'll see, but they don't really get any information out of them, right? So our template is just be really descriptive in those headings because they'll read them, right? And be really descriptive in your links. We're done with learn more.
Yes.
Learn more is done, and you can't swap it for read more. That's not allowed.
Yeah.
Just like click here was dead a decade ago. Okay, we're
Yeah.
done with learn more too. We're done with read more. What are we learning more about? What are we reading more about? So there are some really simple things if you're looking to reinvest in your email program. It's the action driven links and buttons, these more descriptive subject lines and headings that you can use. And these tactics really, really, really work. Again, none of the tricks are going to work if you don't have that trust built there.
Yeah.
But with those two powers combined, you're going to see, I know you're going to see the results.
Yeah.
um, I think the other thing that's really interesting, you think about that whole marketing ecosystem that you were saying, you've got your website, you've got your social channels, like where are you investing? the conversions are also happening in email. So not only is email cheaper, it can be more reliable if you have a good email reputation.
You were just basically reminding everyone to, like, get back to the basics and not worry about buying a whole new, email deployment system and having all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Um, I still think there are a lot of you do talk about this in the book, though. You need to have a strategy
Mm, mhm.
more than a bunch of tools. You need to have a strategy, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you set that up,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah. So my strategy is very reader centric. Maybe that's no surprise. But what I like to do to make sure that we're getting to that place where we're serving and that we're not just asking all of the time is to put ourselves in that kind of quarterly cadence. And I have found that so many teams that struggle to keep up with email volume are on this constant hamster wheel of trying to ship something and get it out. Right. And that if we can plan a quarter ahead of time, it's typically enough time to come up with some really creative ideas, find the right collaborators, and get it together and shipped. So, what we do and what I've been teaching others to do is set up first just a very low stakes quarterly brainstorm exercise
Mhm.
for your email program, for what you want to communicate to your readers. And in that, time travel to the next quarter of life. And that's always a fun exercise, especially for me in the winter, because I can start thinking about spring.
Right.
Right? And to ask yourself, what are people doing? What am I doing in the springtime? I'm going to be really excited to be outside. I am going to probably work on my garden. I'm going to do some spring cleaning. Like, what are these universal things that we do as humans in these different seasons? And then we try to insert our organization into that story.
Mhm.
So, by doing that, by starting to think about the people and what they're going to be doing, again, how they're feeling in their inbox, we're going to meet them with something that feels really relevant and also feels really personal to them. And so we can deliver something that feels personal without it being individualized personalization, content that we might be thinking we need to deliver. But if you were to show up for me in April with a planner for my garden, and you work at an institution that has a faculty member that could help with this, right? Now this feels so relevant to me. So that I think is where our strategy work starts. It's what do the people need from us? How do we insert ourselves into their lives? And
Yeah.
then how do we align the other messages with that, right? So there are going to be things that we want to share, that we want to hear, and messages that we want to put out there. But if it's about a give and take, right? We've got to be giving and not asking all of the time. So I love doing that strategy work where it's about them first, how we insert ourselves into that conversation, and then you will naturally find some of these synergies between, connect the dots between their lives and what your organization's trying to do.
I love it, and such simple, basic things, but we tend to forget.
I think
And
it's really hard if you're like, ooh, next week is International Women's Day. What are we doing for it?
right.
It's too hard to try to put that together in that kind of timeline. But if we
Yeah.
were to give ourselves 3 months lead time, then we can start thinking about how does this make sense for us to be
Yeah.
connected to that thing that's happening to that person. And that's where, you become a more reliable source. You become more relevant to your readers.
Yeah, and you give yourself and your team a little more breathing room to have some fun, right?
Yeah.
Like, then it's like,
Mhm.
"All right, let's talk about April Fool's Day," or, "Let's talk
Yes.
about what are some fun things now that we can focus on? Because 'cause we've got our bases covered, we've got a plan, we've got a
Mhm.
strategy, we've got a tone, we've
Mhm.
simplified things down, we're not burying things under
Mhm.
news and events headlines
Mhm.
anymore, which is one of my personal largest, biggest rages that I fly into is when people use those headlines.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you're guaranteeing that I'm not gonna read this, that I'm assuming that I do not care about
Yeah.
any of what is underneath it that you want me to read. So thank you for I have a big sticky on that page that's just like,
Nice.
"Yeah." Um, well, Ashley, thank you so much for talking, and again, the book is called Mailed It, and it's so chock full of really great, hacks, tips,
Mhm. Mhm.
advice, things to remember, things information to arm yourself with if you're trying to make the case to make a difference here.
Yes.
And it really can make a difference, and it does not require a lot of effort. I think this is the place where a lot can be accomplished, and I think it's a place where a lot needs to be accomplished. So let's all use our email for good. And
Thank you.
yeah, thanks for sharing all of this, and in such a great, enjoyable read as well. And
Well,
to
thank you for lifting it up, and yes, please, everybody, go use the tools for good and not evil. We've got a lot of work to do, we've got a lot of messages to communicate, and we wanna make sure that those good messages cut through all the noise.
yeah, well, thanks for helping make sure that email makes the world a better place.
Awesome. So good talking to you.
So good talking to you.